Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. This time we're going to be looking at last minute notes for section B on the language paper, which is going to be describe and explain in question 5 and argue and persuade in question 6. Question 5 you're going to spend less time on because that's the one that's worth 60 marks and the other's worth 24 marks. The most important thing to remember is that you focus on the what being referred to in the question. So it might be about a time when you had to be responsible, a time when you were really upset, a holiday that you went on, etc, etc, etc. Now you need to focus on the what and why. Okay, each of your paragraphs should kind of lean towards why something was good, or why something was important, or why something was this. And then in the meat of your paragraph is going to be about how it was like that, and that's where you include all the details. As you remember that describe and explain essentially means detail something to a purpose. You're explaining something. If you're explaining it, then you've been asked something and you're actually giving the details of it, and all the details are in the description. So it's basically detailed focus, and that's what you want to do the whole way through. Have a very detailed focus on what you're being asked, why you feel that way about it or felt that way about it, and how. Show it through all the details. You want to be able to isolate specific things. So whatever you mention here, remember to try and give as much of a nuance as possible, as much of a small element as possible, to really give full detail. And you might have to justify, depending on the question, justify what you're saying and actually refer to all the elements in that decision. One of the good ways to make it good in terms of structure is to make it grow. So rather than saying I felt issues A, B, C, D, and actually repeating them then being the same, is you want to make issue A led to issue B, which led to issue C, and then I had to consider issue F. For example, if you're doing a travel piece, you might be looking at saying, rather than just saying I went to the beach, then I jumped in the sea, then I found a jet ski, and going along that way, you might want to go I went to the beach and then I remembered that I had problems with the luggage, etc, and I'd forgot stuff, and why that happened. Then you remembered how your dad was going to have a go at you, then you actually went for a swim into the beach, and then as you watched the jet ski go by, you thought it'd be fun, etc, etc. So you make it grow rather than just making it go from point A, B, C, D, E, and make sure you end strong. And I mention this because a lot of the describe, explain, when it just feels like students either run out of time or run out of ideas, and then they just kind of summarize it very weakly. One of the things about getting an A and an A star is that your piece is strong all the way through, so you need to end with the same kind of verve and confidence that you've started with the beginning. Or make it the other go round. If I was going to do it anyway, go the other way around. You could start with a more simplistic beginning, try and use like a different opening, like an opening with speech or something, or an opening with maybe a sign from somewhere or something you read, just to give it something original, rather than the best ever I had, or the best, whatever it was I ever had was, because the examiner's going to read that 6,000 times over the summer, to try and make yours stand out, and definitely build towards a strong ending. So the actual skills that you actually need to use are the same in both actually, but you want to use linguistic devices like your alliteration, similes, rhetorical questions, etc. Try and make the description very vivid, so use your senses. Use varied sentences and varied sentence lengths. So you might use complex sentences or compound sentences, and then you might have really long sentences, really short sentences, and you're going to have varied punctuation. I remind you that semicolon, exclamation mark, brackets and dash or hyphen, whatever you want to call it, they're the ones that get you a lot of marks in terms of using higher level punctuation. So I would try and use them several times if possible. Remember, with any of these things I mentioned, never overkill. So with these bits of punctuation, you only got to use them a few times in your whole piece. Same with linguistic devices, you only got to use them a few times in your whole piece. Try and have a wide ranging vocabulary, so think syllables. So rather than just saying you were sad about something, you might want to say, or annoyed, you might want to say disgruntled. And generally, like a bigger, better word is going to include more syllables in it, so use it that way. You want to try, and this is actually very important, you want to try and think of adding a unique structural point in somewhere. So that basically, if you looked at it on the page, would be it would just look different than the rest of your text, because obviously most of your writing, or 90% of writing, is going to be in pure paragraphs. And again, you only use this once or twice, no more than that. You want to change the structure to include bullet points, an indent, or speech. So perhaps you open with someone saying something, and that will be slightly different and offset than the rest. You might want to indent something. So for example, you say your question was on responsibility, or someone who's a role model to you, and why they're such such an effect on your life, you might be halfway through and then they sent me this text message, and then you'll indent that and separate it from the rest, and then just put in the text message in 2 lines indented, and then close it, and that's again going to give your piece a unique structure and say, oh, that text message changed my life, or it did blah 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 blah. For example, if you were writing a travel piece and you're actually looking to use a unique structure point, you might want to use bullet points. You might want to say, I'd heard this, I needed to pack these items for the trip, etc, etc, etc. You put them in bullet points, and that gives you a unique structure, which is far more confident writing, to be able to change it rather than sticking to one form or one structural or one form structure of writing. Try to be subtle in what you put and create a world for your reader. So don't try and wow them or completely excite them just by trying to go hammer and tongs with 100% energy in it. Try and make it subtle and make the reader kind of look around your world, really get involved in it, really get into it, because you're giving them so much detail. Don't just try and be like snappy and punchy right at the beginning, because generally your piece won't have the pace all the way through. More serious writing is normally better looked upon than people trying to go for jokes, etc. There's nothing wrong with trying to put in the odd joke humor, but I wouldn't try and make the whole thing a comedy fest, which is what some people try and do. Remember, in your explanations, it doesn't really lend itself to absurd, especially absurdist comedy. It doesn't really lend itself to that in what you're being assessed for here. So in making that world, and I said before, use the senses and sensory writing, then go into the main character's head, then come out and look around. So they're having a thought about something. So if I refer to that beach example again, so he could be looking at the beach and then list a whole beautiful amount of things that he actually sees with all his senses, then come out and look around, and then you say, he walked around and felt this and felt that, etc, etc, and then go back into the head about what he thinks, and then do that. That's a good technique. So if you did all of that, hopefully that will get you quite comfortably towards the higher grades, etc. Looking then at question 6, now we're at the argue persuade question. You're looking at 35 minutes. Now it's really important to actually set your paragraphs up in a certain way. Whatever your point is, you isolate that view, make it very clear, very staunchly support it, and then build it with a reason why, and then back it up with a fact or a testimonial, or proving something through a literary technique, etc. And then acknowledge and neutralize the opposing view. So for example, if we were talking about saving energy, and some people said, well, energy saving light bulbs, they don't give out enough light. You might then say, I acknowledge that some people think that energy saving light bulbs don't save enough light, don't give off enough light to reading comfortably. However, this is a small price to pay, when it's actually millions of billions of homes we're talking about, and the cost of the environment, etc, etc, etc. And then you might want to offer on top of that something that could fix that issue somehow. And then you want to emphasize it into talk about higher level ideas. So what the higher part here I should actually add is kind of general moral or philosophical points. So the point I ended on there when I'm talking about, it's the world, you try and think of something that's higher level than just it's just my life here. Try and think about it in terms of how it affects the rest of the world. But you have to start from an opinion that's slightly lower down to grow. If you started with the really high talking about the world, then obviously you can't grow into something bigger than that. I hope that makes sense. Now use the skills as mentioned above in the sentence variation and the techniques and statistics. So we'll come to that a little more in this section down here. You're going to do exactly the same thing as you did earlier with section 5. You've got to use varied sentences, because this is all about writing skill, varied sentence length, varied punctuation. You're going to be looking at using a very wide vocabulary and unique structure, same as before. Also try and use, depending on how you're writing, first, second and third, because that shows great control. So for example, first, second, third person. So what you're looking at there, you might be talking about yourself, obviously in the first person, and then you might in speech be talking about someone else, or if you're in speech in terms of if you're writing a piece of about a travel journey and what you said, or if you're actually writing a speech, you could be talking you in the front row, you in the back row, you If it was a speech, you're referring to everyone. And then in the third person, you could be talking about people who think this, they are, people who think that, they are, etc, etc, etc. So try and use all three in it to show again the range of control and skill in your writing. and to show enough of the technique use, etc., or things that you could use. Try and remember these. There's alliteration, it makes things stick in your head. Fact actually proves your point. Opinion gives us other people's ideas on something. Onomatopoeia, especially in speech, really makes kind of has a strong effect because it's more oral than the rest. It affects your ears. Sorry, not affect, but it resonates more with the way you're hearing something. Use rhetorical questions because they're always powerful, and it's always good to end a paragraph with a rhetorical question at least once, or actually no more than once. Any of these that you use, only use them once or twice. Don't just use them in every line. That's just bad. Emotive language is always really, really good in the argue and persuade because you're getting across something, making people feel something, making them feel it emotionally. That actually makes it more touching, and therefore they're more likely to agree with you. You might also want to use similes, etc., and metaphors, but one that I would always stick with. T here could actually stand for, the second one could be list of three. I should add that as well. But I would always use testimonials. I think testimonials, Dr. So-and-so from such and such university said, or Paul Bracknell from the Association of Fathers Against Smoking said, just back it up with that real life things, the kind of thing you actually read in real kind of newspapers and arguments, etc. And I hope that's useful. Best of luck with this and all your exams.